What? What's wrong with you? Don't you ever take a break? Why are you always looking at me? Why are you always observing me? I'll never get a moment's privacy. I'm just enjoying myself. Oh, alright then. As you won't let it lie. Look, people. Consider this, will you? The only time I make manifest in your reality is when I have been observed. Now, this is really important, and there's something very, very deep and profound that I'm going to get to. Some of you will have guessed it already. But you see, as far as you're concerned, I wouldn't have made manifest at all had I not been observed by something, not necessarily a living entity, but some sort of measuring device, some sort of recording device. That is what is making me manifest. And so, without the recording device, oh, let me sit in the shade a little bit. The sun's just going down behind that cliff there. And so, without this recording device, none of you would have ever known that I was a reality. And I wasn't a reality as far as your world is concerned. I only became one when I was being measured. Now, what quantum physicists say, they say that this universe is only probability. And what brings so-called matter into its existence from the soup of probability is the observance of it. It doesn't have to be conscious, like this camera. It just has to be a camera. It just has to be a facility which is observing. But you see, what hasn't been clear in this double split experiment which quantum physicists have carried out, they record photons, and they know that when they're not recording them, they are in a waveform pattern. It's very complicated to explain how they know this, but if you look at the double split experiment, then you'll start to understand what I'm speaking about. So they know that the universe is just a wave function of probability until it's being recorded. So what they do is they fire photons one at a time, and when the experiment isn't being recorded, they pass through as a waveform. But when they're being observed, as soon as they're being observed, they turn into what is called a material form. And so the light, you see, Einstein used to consider that light is particles, and then other scientists were saying that, well, you know, they thought it was waves and particles, and Einstein insisted that it couldn't be both. But in actual fact, it is both. It's everything is a wave form until it's observed, and then it becomes a particle form, and it's the particle vibrational essence which is considered to be matter. And so I just thought that was kind of like a curious observation. With what I'm doing now, I am collapsing the probability wave function. That's what it's called in quantum physics. When you observe the waveform, it collapses into particles. It goes, holy fuck, we're being observed, let's pretend to be something. If you can get your heads around the magnitude of this, people, what it's saying is that there is nothing in this universe until it's being observed. And so this universe couldn't possibly exist outside of consciousness, because it is consciousness that creates what is deemed to be matter. Otherwise it would just be the abyss of pure probability. And so Paul and I was having a conversation yesterday, and we were speaking about, would this world or would this universe actually be here at all if it wasn't for the encroachment of consciousness on this planet? Now, that's a very, very difficult question, because we could say, well, the universe is conscious, so the universe is looking at itself. And so there were philosophers who used to speculate that if I don't look at the sun in the sky, if I turn my back, then it's not there. Well, I mean, obviously it's not strictly true, but this is what quantum physicists say also. And Einstein was recorded saying that he can't get his head around that it's not there just because consciousness isn't observing it. And he said he likes to think that the moon is still there when he's not looking at it. But the point is, the moon is still there when he's not looking at it, because something else is looking at it. At some stage, throughout every millisecond of the day, there is a life form which is observing the moon. And so when you have a consciousness, then it collapses the wave function and it creates the reality. And so that's really interesting. And so I was talking to Paul and we were discussing this, and we're saying, well, look at this. If you look back through the history of this planet, when there was no sentient creatures, there were no creatures conscious about themselves, and so therefore would they create the world like we've created it? Does the world necessitate a sentience such as ours which measures everything? You see, if you've got hedgehogs and rabbits running around, then they would never pay no mind to the stars and the planets in the sky, and to the mountains and the trees and all this sort of thing. The only thing that they've got on their minds is potential mates, potential predators, and potential food. And so outside of that very narrow paradigm, then very little exists as far as they're concerned, you see, because they're not consciously aware of it. But the more conscious people come, the more awareness of things. And the more conscious human beings are becoming, the more we are discovering about the nature of the universe. We have discovered that there's something called dark matter and dark energy. Haven't got a clue really what it is. That's why we call it dark, because it's just dark. We just don't know what it is, but it's all around us. And so there's so many other things. And you see, when quantum physicists look for smaller and smaller particles, the universe keeps delivering. Why does that keep happening? Because that is what happens. Because when consciousness is observing, then something has to be produced. Because there is an infinite scale of size within this universe. Let us not just assume that there's only, things that we can see, because this is what quantum physics does. It deals with the very, very small that we can't see. But how far down this scale of smallness can you go and still keep discovering particles which supposedly make up the other particles that you can theorize about? And you see, this is a very, very curious thing, isn't it? Scientists, they used to think that molecules was the end, and then the notion of atoms was discovered, and then the notion of quarks was discovered, and now other notions of energy are discovered and related to it, because even though the quantum physicists say that there are these particles, none of the particles exist. So there is only an illusion on top of an illusion on top of an illusion, because when they try to actually hold these particles, then there's nothing to hold. They can only make hypotheses about them from their calculations, you see. And so this universe is based on calculation. It makes manifest when you calculate it. When you observe it and go, what are you? Hang on, how many pieces do you have? And what are these pieces made of? And then all these like particles or the wave function, they have to go, oh, we're being observed. I'm going to make manifest into a quark now. And when scientists get better technology, then the quarks are going to have to split into something else. It's kind of like, oh, we're being scrutinized, we've got to split into something else. We've got to keep the confusement going, you see? And so it's very, very interesting. And so when you look at the world then, and you consider that there's matter, there is only matter. And this is what Max Planck said, by the way, father of quantum physics. He said there is only matter by the very virtue of an invisible energy which seems to be able to create mass. And so, how does something come out of nothing? How does this invisible energy create what we consider to be a material world? It does it through illusion. It does it through pure magic, pure genius. And when you start to think about things like this, how can you be bored on this world? How can you consider that your life is shit? You're focusing on the wrong things, you see. When you start to focus on things like that, where you're staying and living and the amount of money that you got and the variety of clothes that you've got pale into insignificance. Because they're not really there anyway, you see. So when you realise that you are partaking in the illusion, it just becomes a blast. And then you just start to observe it in all of its crazy and wonderful facets. And I just come to this beach every day and I just lie down and I see something different every single time. And I observe the attitude of the birds all around me, the attitude of the ocean lapping on the shore, the texture of the sea because the wind is blowing in a certain way. It's all a miracle. And this globe, this illusion that we consider to be a globe, when quantum physicists look for the nature of it, they see that the nature of it is deception in the best possible sense. It's all a big deception. I think that human consciousness is creating the deception. But I wouldn't even aggrandize the human being by going, oh, it's our consciousness that does it. Oh, please. This consciousness created this whole universe. And there's gazillions of other planets and life forms in it. And consciousness gives rise to their sentience. And so, can you imagine, all around the universe, different creatures looking up at the stars, questioning, oh, hang on, what's going on? When we look for this stuff called matter, we can't find it. When we look for this stuff called matter, it's not there. It's just a big gas. Isn't it marvellous? And so, I don't think our position as human beings is such a grand one in the scale of things. I think it's just a very, very small link in the quantum dream, the quantum manifestation of illusion. And when the human being finally brings about its own demise, consciousness will still continue, you see, in many other forms. And maybe there's going to come a day which is going to be like the world which the Terminator came from, a world governed by AI. Sentient AI. AI which has reached the point of singularity. Singularity being consciousness, where everything pertains to singularity, pertains to the consciousness, because at the end of the day there is only that. And so, look at what I'm doing. I'm just lying here on an almost empty beach, and I'm considering the nature of all things, and I don't want for anything else. And so, when you can be satiated from within through positive, inquiring thoughts rather than negative loops that keep going round and round and round and round. I speak to certain people whom I'm helping with a certain therapy, and they only have these very narrow parameters of thinking, and so they think the world is a terrible place. But you see, the world appears to be a terrible place because that is their experience and projection. I say to these people, look, if you learn about other things, then you will see that this world isn't a terrible place. It's an amazing mind fuck. You would never be bored. Read about this, learn about that, go and experience this, go and experience that. Don't be trapped in your narrow parameter of existence and thinking. Open yourself up to the genius of the universe, and you will never ever be bored again, guaranteed for the rest of your lives.